I was crouched behind the bakery, half a roll in my hand, so hard it scraped the roof of my mouth. The smell of yeast and sugar from the back door made it worse. I told myself it was enough. Just a bite to get me through the day. Then I heard it. Mom. I froze. I looked up slowly, thinking maybe I imagined it. But no, there he was. Evan. My son. He was still in his work clothes, pressed slacks, shirt sleeves, rolled briefcase clutched like a shield. His face shifted between shock and something close to grief. Mom? What? Where have you been? He asked, stepping closer. You have savings. A pension. I couldn't meet his eyes. I didn't want him to see how far I'd fallen. The bruises were healing but not hidden. My coat was too thin. My shoes had holes. Mason took everything I said quietly. And when I tried to say something, that was enough. He didn't ask who hit me. He didn't ask why I hadn't called. He just reached out careful, like I might break under his touch. Come on, he said, his voice low. Let's go. I didn't argue. I let him guide me into the passenger seat of his car. Warm, clean, unfamiliar. He drove without speaking. I stared at my hands in my lap. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy. Like everything he wanted to ask had already answered itself. We passed the bank, the pharmacy, the turn I used to take home. It didn't feel like my town anymore. When we pulled into his driveway, I saw the porch light flicker on. He didn't say I looked different. He didn't ask why I'd vanished. He just opened the door and said, "This way." And for the first time in months, I stepped into warmth without fear. Evan showed me to the guest room as if he'd prepared it long before he ever expected to use it. Clean linens tucked tight at the corners, a glass of water waiting on the nightstand, a small lamp casting a soft pool of light. It felt like stepping into someone else's life, not my own. You should rest, he said quietly. We'll talk in the morning. I nodded, keeping my hands close so he wouldn't see the tremor. When he stepped out, I closed the door and turned the lock. Not because I feared him, but because the habit of bracing myself had sunk too deep to set aside. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off my shoe. The bruise along my foot had faded to a mottled yellow, a map of every step I'd taken since leaving the house I once believed was mine. I touched it lightly and felt the echo of Mason's anger sharp even in memory. My old canvas purse lay where Evan had placed it on the chair. I reached for it, the fabric soft from years of wear. Inside were the only things I'd managed to keep: a flash drive wrapped in tissue, a receipt from the pawn shop where I'd traded my watch, and the small notebook labeled Coil. The notebook had become a place to anchor myself when the days blurred together. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote slowly, the letters shaky. October 4th. Found by Evan. Didn't cry. Too numb. I closed it and set it beside the lamp. When I finally stood and faced the mirror, the woman staring back looked like a stranger. Hair-limp shoulders, hunched eyes, hollowed by weeks of being unseen. Not a mother, not a wife, just someone who had slipped through the cracks and kept falling. I touched the glass with the tips of my fingers, almost expecting the reflection to pull away. Behind me, the house was quiet, steady, unthreatening, the kind of quiet that could hold a breath or a beginning. I lay down on the bed, pulling the blanket over me, and let the stillness settle as the first step toward whatever came next. Evan made oatmeal for breakfast. He didn't ask what I usually ate or if I liked cinnamon. He just placed the bowl in front of me and sat down across the table, hands folded, face unreadable. "Did you sign over the house?" he asked, voice low, but steady. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I nodded. They said it was just for refinancing. A few weeks, maybe. I didn't read the paperwork. I trusted them. He let out a quiet breath through his nose like he'd been holding it all night. I couldn't tell if he was angry with me or just angry that I was sitting in front of him with bruises? And the rest, he asked. The bruises, I stirred my tea, slowly watching the dark swirl. Mason got angry when I asked to use the grocery cart again. He said I was acting entitled. Evan stood and walked out of the kitchen without a word. A few seconds later, I heard the soft buzz of his voice in the hallway speaking into his phone. I didn't move. I reached into my purse and pulled out the notebook. Property transfer. April. Lawyer Dunn and Fellows. I underlined the name twice. I turned to the back pages, the ones I used for proof I hoped I'd never need. I peeled back a folded strip of tape revealing the photo I'd printed at the library. It was grainy and dim, but you could make out Mason's arm mid-swing a ceramic mug frozen in the air. I'd taken it by accident trying to record a birthday greeting for Callie on my old phone. The timestamp was embedded in the corner. I looked at the photo a long time, then closed the notebook and slid it beneath my placemat. Evan returned a few minutes later. He didn't sit back down, just said, "I'm going to make some calls." He paused, eyes flicking toward the notebook. He didn't ask what I'd written. I stood up slowly, careful with my leg, and walked to the sink to rinse my bowl. The photo still pressed against my memory like a bruise that never fully fades. Evan told me Callie was coming, but he didn't ask if I was ready. I wasn't. But some conversations don't wait for readiness. She arrived mid-afternoon, knocking lightly before stepping inside. Her sunglasses stayed on as she hugged her brother quickly and glanced around like she expected the house to crumble at the edges. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. When she finally looked at me, it wasn't anger in her face, it was something more brittle. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did," I said. "You just didn't want to hear it. You said Mason was under pressure, that I was overreacting, that I should try harder to get along." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, arms crossed tight. "He said you'd wandered off," she said. "He told me you were confused, that you weren't taking your medication anymore." I blinked once. "I was never on any." Callie didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then back to my face. I could see it, the slow unraveling of the story she'd been sold, the version of me that had been rewritten without my consent. I reached into my purse and pulled out the flash drive. I set it on the table between us. "Would you like to see Confused?" I asked. She didn't reach for it immediately. For a moment, she just stared at it like it might burn her fingers. Then slowly, she picked it up. Outside, Evan's car pulled out of the driveway. He was heading to the courthouse. I could see the folder on the passenger seat through the window. Callie sat down across from me. She didn't remove her sunglasses. She didn't speak. But she stayed. I opened my notebook again, wrote down the date, and drew a small check mark beside her name. One breath, one page at a time. And there was still more I hadn't shown them. Evan didn't tell me where he was going that morning, but I recognized the logo on the folder in his hand. County seal, courthouse records, sheriff's department. He left early, barely touching his coffee. I stayed behind, folding laundry that wasn't mine and pretending my hands weren't shaking. When he returned, hours later, he didn't speak right away. He set his keys down, poured a glass of water, then finally sat across from me at the table. "I went to the sheriff's office," he said. "Asked about your report." I looked down. "I tried," I whispered. "Back in July, the day after he pushed me down the back steps." He nodded once tight. "They said it was a family matter. The deputy who took your statement, he's Mason's cousin." That explained it. I hadn't known the connection at the time, just that I'd been asked if I was sure I wanted to cause trouble, if I wanted to upset my daughter's marriage. I had left with my papers still in hand. They had footage, Evan said. "Lobby camera." I asked to see it. His jaw flexed the way it always had when he was trying not to raise his voice. "I watched you walk in, bruised, holding a manila envelope. You stood at the desk, waited, spoke calmly. They waved you off. I swallowed hard. I remembered how heavy that envelope had felt, how long I'd stood rehearsing my words before I even opened the station door. They didn't log the visit, he said. Didn't file anything. I nodded slowly. I wasn't surprised, only tired. Evan reached into his folder and slid a printed still across the table. There I was, time-stamped and small, standing in a room where I didn't matter. He didn't say anything else for a while. That evening, he drove us both in silence. No music, no questions. Just the sound of the road and the weight of what we both knew now. He took the long way home, and I let him. Callie left the front door unlocked for me. She said she would. She didn't say if Mason would be home, and I didn't ask. I wasn't there to confront him. Not yet. I stepped inside slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the space that used to be mine. The furniture was the same mostly, but the soul of the place, the photos, the small touches, was gone. The picture of my wedding once on the hallway table had vanished. The painting Evan made in 3rd grade, gone. The rug I spent 3 months crocheting now sat under the dog crate by the back door, stained and curled at the edges. Callie stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, phone in hand. She didn't speak. She didn't meet my eyes. I just want to get a few things I said quietly. She nodded without looking up. I moved through the rooms like a guest in someone else's home. The guest room door was closed. The sewing machine had been boxed up. My recipe cards were missing from the drawer. When I reached the hallway closet, I hesitated. Then I opened it. The linens had been rearranged. My old quilts, some folded, some missing entirely. And the lockbox that once held my personal files, the deed and backup account info, it was gone. I didn't say a word. I stood there for a while, letting the empty shelf tell its own story. Then I turned, walked back down the hall, and let myself out, without saying goodbye. That night in Evan's kitchen, I opened his laptop and logged into an old email account I hadn't touched in months. I typed slowly, double-checking the address before I hit send. Subject line, need account statement, quietly. The recipient was Nancy Lindell. We'd worked together for 14 years at the school credit union. She'd know what I was asking even without the full story. I logged out, closed the computer, and opened my notebook again. Under today's date, I wrote, closet empty. Lockbox gone, but I'm still here. Then I reached for the envelope and started sorting through what hadn't been erased. Nancy replied to my email before sunrise. A single line, come in early. I'll pull what I can. No questions asked. So I walked to the credit union just as the doors unlocked. She didn't greet me with sympathy or shock, just a nod, the kind you give someone already carrying enough weight. She guided me to her office, closed the door, and slid a stack of printed statements across the desk. 6 months, she said quietly. Every check rerouted. Same withdrawal pattern, same card. Mason's card, of course. Looking at the numbers felt like reliving each month all over again. His excuses, his temper, the nights he told me not to worry about bills because he was handling our household. He had been handling it all right. Straight into his pocket. I thanked Nancy and left with the stack pressed against my chest, holding it like something breakable. Back at Evan's house, I organized every statement, every note, every scrap of proof into a manila envelope. Then I printed my handwritten ledger, a running record I'd kept for months, because something in me refused to stop writing things down, even when speaking felt dangerous. When Evan finished work, we met at a small coffee shop off Main Street. We chose a booth in the corner. I placed the envelope between us. This is everything I said. I never stopped writing it down, even when I didn't know why. He opened the envelope carefully, like it might come apart in his hands. The ledger sat on top pages, thin from being turned so often. He flipped through it slowly. One page caught his eye, a red ink mark I'd drawn on a day that still made my stomach knot. He read the line aloud. Aug 12. He said, "You owe us your comfort." Evan set the page down and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something in his expression had hardened, sharpened. He didn't speak right away, but he didn't need to. I could feel the shift, the quiet, focused kind that precedes action. He folded the ledger and slipped it back into the envelope, already planning the next step. We didn't rehearse it. Evan just looked at me that morning, nodded once and said, "Let's go." I sat in the passenger seat, envelope on my lap, heart steady in a way that surprised me. There was nothing left to beg for, nothing left to salvage. When we pulled up to the house, I stayed in the car. Evan walked up the steps, sleeves already rolled. He knocked once. Mason opened the door, smug and unbothered. "Well, look who you came to talk," he said, with a grin, leaning one shoulder on the doorframe. Evan shrugged off his jacket. "No, the hit came clean, quick, nothing loud or messy, just a sharp crack of bone and shock." Mason stumbled back, grabbing his mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. The smirk gone. Callie stood in the hallway, hand to her chest. No one screamed. Evan didn't follow him inside. He turned, walked back to the car, and opened my door. "You don't have to explain anything," he said, voice calm. And I didn't. I didn't need to see Mason recover. I didn't need to see Callie's expression. Everything I needed was already in Evan's hands and mine. We drove away slowly. No rush, no sirens, just the soft hum of tires on pavement. At the stoplight, Evan reached over and adjusted the heater. His knuckles were already red, starting to swell. I opened my purse and pulled out a napkin, held it out to him. He took it without a word, pressing it gently to the back of his hand. "Was it worth it?" I asked after a minute. He glanced at me. "Yeah," he said. "It was." We didn't say much else on the drive. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was full of things understood. Back at his house, I stepped inside and exhaled. Not because it was over, but because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the only one standing. I reached for my notebook, opened to a new page, and began writing what came next. It took a week for the paperwork to move, but when it did, it moved fast. Evan found a lawyer he trusted, a woman named Loretta, who read everything twice and spoke plainly. She didn't offer pity, just options. I liked her immediately. We met in her office on a rainy Thursday. She explained that the title transfer could be contested due to coercion. The account activity alone gave weight to the case. She'd already filed for a freeze on any further asset movement. "Mason's firm is under review," she added, flipping through a file. "Not just because of this, but this helped." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. My name was finally appearing again in official places, in print, on forms, not as a footnote, but as the origin point. It felt strange, like returning to a home that had been repainted, the furniture rearranged. Later that day, back at Evan's house, I sat at his dining table with a mug of tea and my notebook open beside me. Outside, the first of the leaves had begun to fall, scattered across the porch, like quiet reminders that time moves, whether you're watching or not. Inside, the heater kicked on with a low hum. Familiar. Safe. I turned to a new page and wrote, October 11th, I am back. Not broken. Just recalibrated. Callie had sent a message that morning. She'd filed for separation. No explanation, just a line that read, I understand now. I'm sorry it took me so long. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I read her words more than once. I looked around Evan's dining room. The table was scratched at the corners, the chairs mismatched. There were papers stacked neatly on the counter, grocery bags half unpacked. Nothing fancy, but nothing stolen either. This wasn't my house, but it didn't have to be. What mattered was that I wasn't outside it anymore. I closed my notebook, set my tea down, and stood up. There was one more thing I needed to put away before the night settled. I opened the drawer, placed the flash drive inside, and turned the key. Not because I feared what was on it, but because I no longer needed it at arm's reach. I wasn't building a case anymore. I was keeping a record for me. The pension deposits were returning to my name. No reroutes. No automatic withdrawals to someone else's life. A few clicks and one phone call had done what months of silence could not. The house was still in litigation. Mason's attorney sent a letter with carefully chosen words and veiled threats. Loretta responded with better ones. She said it might take months, maybe longer, but I didn't need the front door to know I belonged somewhere again. I wasn't waiting for closure. I wasn't waiting, period. Somewhere along the way, peace stopped feeling like an outcome. It became a choice I made every morning. I opened the curtains every evening, I washed a plate, and placed it gently in the drying rack. I pulled the ledger from the shelf. The cover had softened corners, curled. I'd stopped writing daily once things shifted, but today felt different. At the kitchen table, I opened to the last blank line. The page was quiet, waiting. I wrote, I didn't vanish. I was buried. And now I'm standing. I closed the book. Outside, Evan was trimming the hedges. I could hear the soft snip of shears, the low murmur of his voice on a call. Life went on, not loud, not triumphant, just steady. I made a cup of tea. Not to soothe, not to settle, but because I wanted one. Then I sat at the window with the sun falling across my hands. No one called. No one needed anything from me. And that, too, was peace.